Today's culture is saturated with both emasculated men and men that are consumed with toxic masculinity. In this video, I want to talk about why we need men to have a biblical manhood and a biblical view of masculinity now more than ever, for the sake of our churches, for the sake of our homes, and for the sake of our community. Before making any comments about, emasculation or toxic masculinity or even biblical manhood, I want to maybe make an appeal as to why you should keep watching this video. If you're a parent, I think you should keep watching this video because your children are being discipled by a culture about what a man is. Your sons are being told what a man is. Your daughters are being told what they should look for in a man. And that matters. You want to help them know what a man is. You want to help them know what they should look for in a man. And you want to help them know what type of men they should aspire to be and look up to. And if you're a man, you should desire to be a biblical man. If you're a woman, this is a video for you as well, because you should look for a man who is not emasculated, not toxic, but a man who is a biblical man. And if you're a man, this is a video for you, because this is a video calling you to leave behind the cultural emasculation, leave behind toxic masculinity, and pursue a biblical manhood, to pursue a biblical masculinity that models the life of Christ, that lives for Jesus, and that longs to not look like this world, but longs to be like the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. Our cultural moment is kind of at this point where we do have this emasculation or toxic masculinity. There is this moment where it seems like these two things are kind of clashing with one another. And so I want to talk about both of those before we look at biblical manhood. And so, when it comes to the emasculation of men that's taken place over really the past 30 years, this has kind of taken place within the pop cultural sphere. It's taking place in shows and in movies, in pop cultural things like that. Men are often depicted as lazy or as dumb. Think about Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson is often depicted as this kind of stupid, lazy, dumb dad.
Steady. Steady.
And if men are not depicted like that, they're depicted like the enemy. Think about how many movies that were our favorites growing up, or maybe your favorite, maybe not my favorite, because I watched them well after they came out, but they were remade like in recent years, and the script was flipped, and now it's an all-female protagonist lead, and the main villain is now a man. And so the emasculation of men has turned them into men are now evil. And that matters, because this is a thing that's happening. It's a cultural thing that's actually going on, where men are being emasculated and seen in the public eye as bad. We also have a more recent event where Meryl Streep has been offered the role to play to voice Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or The Chronicles of Narnia, written by C.S. Lewis in the new rendition that is going to be coming out. You may think that that's not that big of a deal, but it's a huge deal, because you take a key figure that's a Christ figure in Lewis's work that is a male, and you now say, we're actually going to make it a female. It's this emasculation. It's this removal of male figures. And almost saying, well, why do we need them to be male? Why do we need them to be men? Gavin Ortland has a really significant video on this. I encourage you to check it out. And he goes into much more detail on this, and he talks a lot about the impact of this and why it's important theologically and culturally as well. And I think we need to acknowledge the fact that is a possibility is a result of the emasculation that's happening broadly in our culture with men. There's also this idea that being competitive or assertive is actually an oppressive trait to have if you're a man. And those are just kind of natural traits within men, especially in boys, right? Boys are just kind of naturally competitive or naturally assertive. And so when they're told that those are oppressive, those are kind of told to tone those things down at a young age, it begins this young age young age emasculation of them as we kind of try to calm young men down. There's also all this coupled with the championing of the girl boss era that we're in, right? We saw the Barbie movie that came out recently. And the Barbie movie came out, and the Barbie movie, the main idea is that they're in Barbie land, and it's a matriarchal society where the women control everything, and it's really, the issue with that isn't that women control everything, but it's that women control everything at the expense of men. It's this full-on emasculation. One of the ways that this is being demonstrated in our modern society, we don't live in Barbie land, but we do live in this society where men are truly being emasculated. And I think that's happened in the pop cultural sphere. It's having real life impacts on men. It's having impact on young boys and teens and adults as they go into adolescence. Is that women going into college are graduating at higher rates than men are. And now you may think, well, that's not that bad of an idea, right? Is that really that big of a deal that women are graduating college? Why would that be something we would even be concerned about? As Christian, not want women to go to college. It's not it at all. I think that women should go to college. Women should go to universities. They should graduate. They should do all of those things. That's a good thing. It's a good thing that that's happening. It's a bad thing that's happening at the expense of men being discouraged to go to university. And you may say, well, what's the evidence of that? Well, maybe there's not this overt discouraging, but something is happening within our culture over the past 30 years that has led a shift away from men graduating at the same rate that women were from universities. So in 1995, and you'll be able to see this, a Pew Research study shows this. In 1995, 25% of U.S. men and 25% of U.S. women between the ages of 25 and 34 were likely to hold a bachelor's degree. In 1995, 30 years ago, it was equal. By 2024, 47% of women of that same age category, 25 to 34, held a bachelor's degree, while only 37% of men did of that same age bracket. That 10% difference, it's subtle, but it's significant because it expresses a divide in a cultural moment. What changed over those 30 years where women are being more encouraged, being held more accountable to follow through with graduation? What changed? There are probably lots of things that have led to that. There's something ultimately larger at play probably there than just simply pop culture. We can't say the movies made this happen or TV shows made this happen. Lots of things have played into that. And the overall emasculation of men. Of course, fatherlessness in the home, men not taking responsibility for having children, young men, young boys not having healthy male role models to look up to, ultimately does have an impact on their masculinity. Yes, it's good that young boys have a healthy relationship with older women in their lives, including their mothers, but they need healthy relationships with older men, particularly their father. There is a great need for fathers to be fathers. One of the things with this in discipleship is that discipleship sometimes actually turns into this where, especially when there's a big age gap, where discipleship turns almost into a spiritual son type relationship. We need to acknowledge that, because there is such a need right now in our cultural moment for us to have spiritual fathers, because so often in our current moment with the emasculation of men that we need to be a model for what it looks like to just be a man. So if you're a man, you should be aware of that. If you're a man in a community, in a church setting, you should be aware that there are young men in your setting, in your circle, who are probably watching you and looking to model certain aspects of your life as they seek to live it out. And maybe you don't even have a close relationship with them, but that is, in fact, happening. Another thing that's aided the emasculation of men in the U.S., I think, is the excessive pornography use. I think it's led to men being passive. I think it's led to them being less likely to take risk. Common Sense Media put out this study, and I'll have a link to this study and the Pew Research study as well. But in 2023, they had a study that said that 73% of teens, 13 to 17-year-old, said that they had consumed online pornography. 54% of those said that they had seen pornography for the first time at the age of 13 or younger. And the study goes on to show like how many of them saw pornography at school, how many of them saw pornography for the first time on a school-owned laptop or device. And so the exposure to pornography is at a young age is having real implications on the minds of young men. And of course, pornography use is an issue for women as well, but I think it's causing men to have a serious emasculation issue here. And I think it probably has played a little bit into toxic masculinity as well. Early pornography use and the exposure is having detrimental impact on the next generation of men. And one way that is playing out is that they don't know how to be men. As teens seek pleasure when they're stressed out or bored, they don't handle that well. They just go to pornography and they consume it and they consume it, and it creates a whole new way of thinking that removes one's entire ability to live a disciplined life, that handles stress well, that handles responsibility well. And as they run to perverse desires instead of running to actually handling conflict or handling stress or handling whatever issue is in front of them, all it does is making them less likely to take risk. It makes them risk averse. It makes them more passive and creates men who are not proactive. It makes men who don't have a bias for action, and it makes men who ultimately are emasculated. It really is a tragedy what pornography is doing to the minds of young men. And I think that is a big issue in this question about the emasculation of men. And it's really interesting about the continual rise of pornography and the continual cultural acceptance of pornography. We should be very concerned with how accepted pornography is becoming in our pop culture. It is having a horrible effect on the next generation of both men and women. Before we move on to talking about toxic masculinity, I do think it's important that we maybe look at an example of an emasculated man. I asked ChatGPT, and so I don't mean this in an offensive way. I asked ChatGPT this question. ChatGPT came up with this. This was AI. This isn't Christian looking at him and coming up with this answer. I asked ChatGPT, could you give me an example of someone in the public eye who is an example of being emasculated? And it came up with this answer of Prince Harry. And so Prince Harry is a part of the royal family. He's once seen as strong, independent, royal, but now he's often portrayed as controlled by his wife, Meghan Markle, and he's alienated from his family. He's separated from them, and he's identity as royalty. He's no longer that. He's this, his public image as being a strong military man who is this kind of outgoing, even kind of like party animal type guy, is shifted from being that and this like man who has a sense of duty to this guy of emotional fragility and cultural compliance. And those were like the words of the AI of ChatGPT. And I thought it was really interesting because it identifies that this individual has followed the cultural idea of what it looks like to be a man. Of just kind of going with the flow of things rather than standing firm and with a conviction for personal beliefs. And we're going to talk about why that's an issue in a little bit. Whether it's a lack of men graduating school, the lack of men being in fathers in the home, pornography use, or whatever else it may be. The emasculation that plagues many men across the United States, across the world, is a real issue. and the response to the emasculation in pop culture has been toxic masculinity. It's not like a level-headedness. It's usually a toxic masculinity. And toxic masculinity is marked by aggression, dominance separated from servanthood, pursuit of sexual conquest, pursuit of possessions, and an avoidance of responsibility. Now, so many men on social media and YouTube have these platforms that they just promote sexual promiscuity, a successful lifestyle, fitness, and a life where one is served rather than serving others. Many individuals like Dan Bilzerian, Andrew Tate, and Justin Waller they kind of culminate this world. And there's many more who are the peak individuals of this that exemplify toxic masculinity. But of the most famous is probably Andrew Tate. Tate was in America more recently, and he spent some time traveling around doing podcasts. And Tate's in all types of legal trouble. He's just constantly in the news for really being erratic and being someone that no one should look up to, but being someone who constantly thinks he should be someone that people look up to. And it's kind of alarming to think that people do look up to him. He was on the Patrick Bet-David show, and on his podcast, he's talking about being a father and what it looks like to be a real man. And so I want us to check out this clip from someone who is in this category of being what I would consider a toxic man, someone who exhibits toxic masculinity. Check out what he says about being a father and being a man. And so this is a couple clips together. Just check it out.
How often should a father be with their child? And I'd love to get PBD's opinion on this, because it would seem to me he's way more hands-on with his children than you. So how do you grapple with that?
Interesting question. And I would say that instead of just talking about fatherhood, let's talk about masculinity in men as a whole, because depending how competent you are as a man depends how potent you are with your time. So before I apply this to fatherhood, I'm going to apply it to something else. If you are a man who works in Starbucks and you're not that interesting and you're not that successful, for you to have a woman to be loyal to you, you need to be next to her all day, every day. You need to hold her hand, and you need to be with her every night. And you have to come home every day, and you have to talk to her all the time and text her all the time, etc. If you're one of the most famous, important, rich men in the world, you can talk to a girl an hour a day or 20 minutes a day, and you can see her once a month, and she'll be loyal to you. Why? Because of the potency of the man, the capability of the man. It's like most things, right? You need less potent alcohol than you do need a whole bunch of weak alcohol. And I would argue it's the same with fatherhood. I think the best fathers are so busy getting things done that yes, they see their children. And I see my children all of the time. I see a different child every single day. So I'm with my kids 2 or 3 times a week, all of them. But I'm so busy getting things done that I can't be with them all the time. It's true. I argue that would be offset by the fact that I am who I am. If I meet an average person on the street, someone I've never even met, and they say, I watched your videos, you changed my whole life, and I meet them for 5 minutes and I shake their hand, it becomes their story for the week. I can have an influence on people quickly because I'm potent. And it's the same with my children. My father raised me that way. My dad could be home an hour a week because he was my dad.
You're saying quality time is way more important than quantity of time.
I'm saying your capability of a man as a man in all realms, your capability as a man reduces the amount of time you need to spend there. Look at a CEO. A CEO can spend an hour a week in a business. He's the CEO. Mm-hmm. It's different than if you're a normal guy. You got to be there all the time. I believe that potency as an individual allows you to speed run things. You can speed run fatherhood. You can speed run being a boss. These CEOs who have 20 companies, and they just turn up once a month because he's the boss. It matters when he's there. And it's the same with me being a father.
This clip goes on, and Tate gets more and more explicit as it goes on. So if you decide to go listen to the full show, just be aware of that. It does get more explicit. It is explicit throughout. He's not a man who wants to watch his tongue, and so you've been warned on that. But I think that this type of nonsense is a perfect summary of toxic masculinity. It's avoiding the responsibility of being a father under the guise of saying that you can speed run that duty. And the idea that you could do that is alarming. Thinking that you could simply, I'm just so potent that I can just do it so well by only being here for a short amount of time. He does go on he condemns Patrick Bet-David for spending a lot of time with his kids. And he says, I just can't do that because I have so many of them from different women, so I just don't have the ability to do that. And that in and of itself, he fails to understand that in and of itself is a failure to actually be a man. to actually live a lifestyle, to live a life that is truly exhibiting what it looks like to be a man, where you have committed yourself to one woman, to loving her and to loving the children that you have made with her. And we could go all into all of that and why Andrew Tate's worldview and philosophy has failed, and he has misunderstood what it means to be a man. But this is what toxic masculinity is all about. It's about the pursuit of one's self-pleasure at the expense of others. It's about the pursuit of self-pleasure at the expense of anyone else, and doing anything I can to get what I want, when I want it, whenever I want it, and however I want it. And he would say definitely that he's not avoiding responsibilities. Like, I work so hard. I think that he probably does work really hard. But at the end of the day, I think what Andrew Tate does is that he avoids by having failed to actually act as a man who takes responsibility by being a father of just his children with the one woman. He has failed to take on the ability to be a good father who's actually present in his children's life. And one of the arguments that Tate probably would give to this is, well, what color is your Bugatti? And oftentimes that's the argument that those in this camp give. They go to, well, how much money do you have? What type of material possessions do you have? And overall, I think that even gets at the core line of the core values of toxic masculinity, is that if you have things, you are of value. If you have something, you're worth something. The toxic masculinity that's pushed by Tate and others, it really is all about this idea that if it pleases you, it's worth pursuing, even if it's at the expense of others, including if it's at the expense of your own children. And that's such a sad worldview to have. It's not a worldview that a biblical man can actually hold to. And so we need to avoid that type of thinking. These ideas of manhood, they run rampant in our culture, and they're why we must have true biblical manhood today. The response to the emasculation of men is toxic masculinity, and toxic masculinity in some ways is worse because it goes from men using pornography excessively and being risk averse and being passive, to now you have men who are abusing women in sexual exploitive ways and horrible ways, and then just seeking their own perverse desires, destroying their own souls and ways, destroying relationships with people. And toxic masculinity is all about seeking self-pleasure and sensuality and all of those things. There's one more thing I want to play, and it's an interaction from Andrew Wilson, who's an Orthodox Christian, and it's an interaction he has with Wes Watson. Watson, I think, is a guy who exemplifies toxic masculinity. Wilson, I don't agree with everything that he does. I don't agree with everything that he says. I don't know if he is outright exemplifies biblical manhood. This video that I show you, I'm only going to show you a small snippet of it because it goes on to get much worse. They both get very explicit in the conversation, but I think it does show at the beginning how toxic masculinity says if you have wealth, you are of value, whereas a worldview that's not like that says there's so much more to life than just having things. Life and success is more than just having things.
It's okay to have materialism. It's not against Christian ethics to become rich, become wealthy, but I just think it's all beside the point, ultimately. You're trying to go for a single thing, and it's to achieve something greater than
money?
The person.
Does he have money?
No.
Do you have money?
No, I don't have.
How much money do you have?
I don't
Does he
have money. But here's the thing. Why is money valuable?
Do you have money?
What is money valuable for?
I'm just asking. Do you have money?
I just told no. I'm broke. I'm a nobody.
No, but really, you are?
Yeah.
Is he really broke?
Yeah.
I just want to know. I have to know.
No, I'm not. I'm not one of these rich guys. I don't have a Bugatti. I don't have a Lambo. I
just really have to know. Like, how much money you got?
Probably the $5 in my pocket. Not much more.
Can anyone answer for the guy?
Why do they think I'm kidding? I have a family. I take care of an entire family. That takes a lot of money.
He's doing all right.
Okay,
but okay.
This is the thing, you guys. If you ain't fit, you can't say it's not all about being being in good
Why-
shape.
why not?
If you don't have money, you can't say it's not all about money.
Yeah, why
But
not?
if he does have money, he can say that.
Why not?
Wilson, he's an interesting guy. He has lots of good debates. You should listen to some of those. Be aware he does use some colorful language in all of them. But one of the things I think he does point out in this is that the world's view of success, the world's view of wealth, is missing the deep value of family, of love. It's missing the real values that we see in the scriptures. It's really missing what we're going to talk about when it comes to being a biblical man. And that Wes Watson just can't even seem to get his mind around that. And so with all that said, let's talk about what a biblical man is. Now, there's lots of definitions of that. What is a biblical man? What is biblical masculinity? And I don't want to be exhaustive here, but I want to provide a sketch for us as to what a biblical man is, because this is what makes up true biblical masculinity. That is not humiliated or emasculated, nor is it toxic, but it's lowly and confident. And that's the paradox of the Christian life, where we walk in lowliness, yet we're confident in the power of the God who has made us, who now indwells us. And so a biblical man is responsible. He takes ownership of what God has entrusted to him. You think about Jesus. Jesus took ownership of his role on earth, as his mission was to come and to live a perfect life and to die a death he didn't deserve, so that he could be raised from the grave and ascend into heaven. Jesus took ownership of that. When God creates Adam and Eve in the garden, he gives Adam a task. Adam has a job to do. Just as Adam has a job to do, you and I have a job to do. Every single day we have a job to do. We have responsibilities. One of the things that Jeff said to me early on whenever we had kids, he said to me, Christian, you need to understand that just because you get off from your job and you head home doesn't mean your workday ends. Because when you get home, you need to put on your second pair of work clothes. And that's not to say that loving my wife and loving my children is a job. It is to say that it is my responsibility, is my duty to not walk in the door, sit down on my phone, and scroll. My duty when I walk in the door is to sit down, love my children, give my wife a kiss, play with them, have fun, enjoy the evening. You only have so many hours in the day. Do your duties as a husband. Do your duties as a father. You have a responsibility. Take responsibility for the things that are before you. Do your job well. Work hard. Work hard in the workplace. Work hard in the home. The biblical man sacrifices. He gives himself up for the good of others. Husbands especially do this, right? Jesus says, or Paul says, that we're to be like Christ, who gave himself up for the bride. Jesus sacrifices himself for the bride, his bride. And so we should be doing that. If you're a husband, you're sacrificing for your wife. But I think in general, men should be looking to give up things that benefit themselves for the sake of others. That's a thing we should be doing. We should be looking to champion others along the way. The biblical man leads. He leads with courage and humility and love. We must be courageous, not looking to cower at the ways of the world or the enemy, but looking to be bold and strong in the midst of the attacks of the evil one. We lead with humility, where we champion others. And, when we say lead, we're not saying that you have to take charge and be loud and boisterous in every single thing we do. People lead in all different ways. Sometimes there's quiet leaders, sometimes there's strong leaders. But we're saying lead. You need to be someone who stands firm, that people can look to. And people look to people for different things. One of the things that I remember hearing about John Wooden, I love John Wooden on leadership. John Wooden is a famous UCLA basketball coach, and Wooden was always adamant about leaders. He said, leaders make others better. And I think that that's so true. So if as a biblical man, do you make those around you better? Are they better men? Are they better women? Are your children better because you're in their life? Or are you like a leech that's just sucking from them, taking from them, only to make yourself better, only to have yourself get pleased? And so that's just something worth asking. And so, we must lead with love, because I think when we lead with love, we're not looking to have our own pleasures met, but we're looking to serve. And when we lead with that idea of service going forward, that is the type of biblical leadership that we're called to have, because Jesus leads with a servant leadership. We're looking to serve. We want to serve others, championing them, helping them be better. One of the questions that you can ask people around you is, how can I help you be better? How can I help you? There's the famous John F. Kennedy quote, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And I think it's a great quote. I think we should flip it. Stop asking what your church can do for you. Start asking what you can do for your church. Stop asking what your community can do for you, and start asking what you can do for your community. Stop asking your friends what they can do for you. Start asking your friends what you can do for them. Stop asking your wife what she can do for you. Start asking your wife what you can do for her, and so on and so on and so on. Start asking those around you what you can do for them, how you can help them be better. That's what true leadership looks like. That's what it means to be a biblical man. A biblical man is also convicted. He lives by the truth of God's word. He stands on it. He's not going to cave to the culture. He's not going to cave to the pressures of the age. He's going to be convicted of God's word. You think about Luther when he's standing before the Diet of Worms, and he says, "Here I stand. My mind, my conscience is bound by the word of God. I shall do no other." We want to be men who are committed to the word of God, convicted by the truth of God's word. Biblical man is also strong. And I don't just mean like physically strong. I mean like physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually strong. Like we're capable of standing the tide, and we understand that we're to use our power not for control, but for protection and for building others up. This is a power of might, not of might and looking to be explosive, but looking to use the power that we have in a controlled way to help others feel loved and cared for as we look to exhibit the authority that we have. We're to be strong for those around us. The biblical man is also to be in community. I was thinking about this. This is the one I added. I added this one last. I didn't have it in here originally, and I thought more and more about it. But the biblical man is to be in community. Men are so quick to isolate. Men need each other. You cannot live the Christian life alone. You can't hide your away. You need other people around you. You need people to hold you accountable. You need other people to help you be more like Jesus. You need people to help you be better. And other people need you to help them be better. Iron sharpens iron. You need to live in community with other men. You need accountability. You need to be discipled, and you need to be discipling. A biblical man is in community. Jesus is probably the only example of this, right, where Jesus often did go away, but Jesus was also in community. He had his 3 closest friends, Peter, James, and John, right? And he had the 12. Like, Jesus really had these types of relationships. We cannot forget that. It's important that we remember that Jesus himself had close friends. You need close friends. You need those relationships. A biblical man is in community. It matters. You're not a lone wolf. Ultimately, Jesus exhibits all of these traits perfectly, and so many more, right? The list could go on and on and on. Which is why if you want to grow and be in a biblical man, if you want to have a biblical masculinity, you should start looking to Christ. I think it also means that you should invite others to hold you accountable. Hey, I want to be more like Jesus. Hold me accountable to these standards. Help me to look like him. Help me to walk in humility, to be lowly, to be about serving others. It means that you should get into a discipleship relationship where you're going to be called to a standard, to have a bias for action, and to even have someone to model your life after. When men exhibit biblical manhood, I think it has drastic implications. Homes will have fathers in them that are proactive in raising their children. Children will have fathers to look up to. There will be leaders to lead and to serve others in that capacity, even when it's hard. And there will be men to take responsibility and charge on the hardest days. You know, there's a recent video that came out of the UK where they were asking young men if they'd serve their country in war, and I thought it was really interesting. So I want you to check out this video because it's telling of the state of men right now who don't know that they need to take responsibility for things that are good and worthwhile and true, and things that are worth holding on to.
What do you think of conscription in the UK?
I'm good, thank you, bro.
War is bad.
War is bad?
War is bad.
How old are you?
20.
21.
Do you know what conscription is?
Nah.
You are forced to fight for England. You don't have a choice.
Okay.
Would you fight for England?
Nah, not at this stage. Nah. Not with how the country's been run now. Nah, I wouldn't.
What about yourself, sir?
I would, but not for this government. I'm English myself, so I'm quite patriotic, you know what I mean? But not for this government, I wouldn't.
Basically, you have to fight for your country. You don't have a choice. Well, that's the thing. Oh, man, that's a tough one. Me, I'd say yes, but then when it comes to it, let's call it a no, honestly. Do you think war these days, do you think it is kind of normalised, and do you think there's an element of corruption in war, or do you think it's honest? Nah, corruption for sure, man. Yeah, I'd agree with you on that one. So if you were forced to fight kind of against Russia on behalf of Ukraine as an English young man, would you do it?
Most likely not.
Now, I'm not saying that to be a biblical man, you have to fight for your country. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that we need men who understand the need to take responsibility and ownership for what has been given to them. We need men who are willing to make sacrifices for the next generation. You think about the great generation, the greatest generation, right? Those that fought in World War II. They fought in World War II because they understood that what they were fighting for was the freedoms and rights of not just themselves, but the next generation. They were people who understood that they had a responsibility, that they had been given something that was worthwhile to pass on to the next generation. You know, one of the things we have to acknowledge is that we've been given a societal moment, a civilizational moment, if you will, as Os Guinness says, where we will have a ruin or renewal, and it's all based on what we will do. You know, will we take responsibility? Will we have biblical men who stand up, who long to be proactive, who long to disciple, who long to equip, who long to be proactive in training, equipping, and defending even the need for more biblical men? You know, I think about this age that we're in, and the need for men to just be biblical men, to not be emasculated, to not be toxic men, but to be more like Jesus, and how much that will actually impact our cultural moment. You know, the culture, the church, and homes are benefited by men being faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ and learning what it looks like to model Him day in and day out, to live a life after Him. You know, if you're a man, the church, your home, your community, the culture, it doesn't need you to be Andrew Tate. It needs you to be like Jesus. It needs you to be like Jesus, not Andrew Tate. As a kid, some of my favorite stories, and still today, some of my favorite stories are the stories about knights and kings who fought dragons to save princesses. And, you know, oftentimes they're making these huge sacrifices, you know, whether it's Star Wars or King Arthur or whatever it may be. I loved these stories of heroes who are willing to go the extra mile. And they often exhibited some of the things that we're talking about, where the main character was willing to be strong and courageous and sacrificial, to lead by serving others, to take responsibility for the things at hand. And you know, the thing that's interesting, I think about this, is that in those stories that we love, in those stories that we hold dear, the heroes that we look up to in those stories are heroes that aren't emasculated or exhibit toxic masculine traits, but they're the exact opposite. They're the ones that exhibit, in some sense, these biblical masculine traits. They're the biblical manhood traits that we've talked about. Ironically, it's the Andrew Tate attitude. It's the toxic masculinity of the age that's exhibited in the enemies of the books and the stories that we read or watch. You know, the loud, self-centered taker of whatever he wants, whenever he wants it, usually isn't the good guy. He's not the protagonist in our favorite stories. We don't usually cheer for him. That's probably because of the way God has wired us to be. He's wired us to want to cheer for. He's wired us to need heroes that are going to be more like Jesus. And so we cheer for them in our favorite stories. We need to be like the heroes of our favorite stories. We need to be like the hero of the best story ever. We need to be like Jesus. We need men who are pursuing Jesus day in and day out. We need to be men who are seeking to live for him every day, and not men who are looking to have as much sex as possible, not men who are alpha, not men who are egotistical, not men who are all about pleasure and materialism, but men who are about Jesus. If you're a man watching this, your home, your friends, your church, your community, and the next generation need you to be a biblical man. Let me know other ways that men can exhibit biblical manhood, how they can grow as men who are masculine in all of the godly ways, and how we can cultivate that more in discipleship in the comment section. And let me know how else you think that the culture is trying to shape masculinity and manhood in the negative ways. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And so make sure you like this video, share it with others, and make sure you're following and subscribed. And until next time, we will see you then.